They said motherhood would break her, that once the child grew inside her she'd lose her edge, her instincts dulled by softness, her resolve replaced by fear. But what they didn't see coming, what none of them could have imagined, was that she would give birth in the middle of a battlefield, surrounded by smoke, steel and screams, and still keep fighting. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wind was dry and bitter that morning, sweeping over the high desert plains of Kerith as Commander Leora stepped off the transport. Her boots crunched against shattered rock, the kind of land where nothing grew and everything died hard. Dust swirled like whispers around her ankles, and above, the skies churned a dull rust red, bloated with heat and war. A shadow passed overhead, one of their own recon drones, flashing blue against the violent sky. She didn't flinch. Leora had always been unshakable, raised in the ashen wastes, hardened by rebel skirmishes before she could write her own name. She wore command like second skin. But now she was 7 months pregnant, and every room she entered buzzed with judgment. They say she's still on the front lines, the whispers slithered. She'll crack, the baby will make her slow, vulnerable. Let them talk. She had long since learned to listen to instinct, not opinions. The war had entered its 16th month. Supplies were short. Morale, shorter. The insurgents from the Zoring Crescent had pushed deeper into the Allied regions than anyone predicted, catching most divisions off guard, except Leora's. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Even with her growing belly, her unit, the 7th Echo Division, hadn't lost a single sector under her command, not one. And she never asked for special treatment. She trained harder, slept less, read every enemy tactic until her vision blurred. Her body may have been changing, but her will remained sharp as the blade she wore across her back. But this mission would be different. High Command had summoned her for a special directive. The intel was vague, something about a weapons convoy trapped behind enemy lines, something about a classified asset needing extraction. She didn't care about the politics. All she saw was that her soldiers were outnumbered, trapped, and no one else was coming. She requested the lead. Denied came the response, cold and clinical. The excuse, your condition poses too great a liability. She stared down the colonel issuing the denial, her voice even, low. And what about the liability of losing 30 men in hostile terrain with no support? A silence. She added, I trained every one of them. If anyone can bring them back, it's me. Reluctantly they approved her deployment, but not without attaching a dozen caveats. A support medic. Evac backup. An emergency override if her vitals dropped. She didn't argue. She just nodded, turned, and boarded the next carrier. The mission into the cracked valley was supposed to be quick, a surgical extraction. She would drop in, reroute the trapped squad through the western ridge, and airlift them out. But fate had other ideas. Halfway through the extraction, just as the team reached the ridge, the sky exploded. Mortar fire, drones screaming through the clouds. The insurgents had intercepted the route. The firefight began instantly. Bullets rained like metal hail. Her squad spread out, returning fire with precision. Leora moved with the ease of a predator, positioning, commanding, shielding a fallen soldier with her own body before dragging him behind cover. Then it happened. A jolt of white-hot pain pulsed through her lower back, a strange tightening in her abdomen. Her breath caught. Not now, not here. She felt it again, a deeper pull, rhythmic, inevitable, contractions. The baby was coming. She didn't say a word. In that moment, the world became two things, the battlefield in front of her, and the storm inside her. Through grit teeth, she radioed the squad to adjust formation, pushing the flank back toward an abandoned bunker. Every movement was deliberate, every command calculated. She directed them like a conductor leading a symphony of chaos. Inside, the contractions grew closer. Her hands trembled only once, and then never again. Sergeant Varn, the team medic, noticed. Commander, your vitals are spiking. Are you? I'm fine, she snapped. Keep the line tight, we're not losing anyone. They made it to the bunker under cover of darkness. 5 wounded, 3 barely conscious. She locked the steel door behind them as the sounds of war echoed outside like distant thunder. Inside the concrete walls under a flickering light, she finally allowed herself to breathe, and then doubled over as another contraction tore through her. Varn rushed to her. "Commander, help me lie down," she said, her voice steady despite the sweat pouring down her brow. "Then get back to the others. We have hours until exfil. I'll hold. But you're in labor, and we're in war," she whispered. "Now move." Alone in the corner of the bunker, with nothing but her knife for support and her grit for strength, Commander Leora prepared to do the impossible: birth a child, survive the siege, lead her people home. And outside, the enemy closed in. The silence inside the bunker was suffocating. Outside, distant explosions rolled across the night like thunder on cracked glass. Inside, the air was thick with blood, fear, and the faint scent of oil from leaking power cells. The wounded moaned in restless sleep. Varn moved between them, administering stimulants and stitching torn flesh with practiced urgency. And in the far corner, Leora gritted her teeth as another contraction coiled through her like a vice. She refused to scream. Pain was not new to her. She had endured broken bones, burn wounds, poison gases, and shrapnel in places no blade should ever reach. But this was different. Deeper, older, like her very soul was being torn in half to bring something new into the world. Still, she stayed silent. If the others knew she was in active labor, they would panic, try to protect her, divide their attention. They needed to believe she was still their pillar, their shield. She pressed one hand against the cold wall to steady herself and whispered a mantra she'd carried since childhood. "You do not fall, you rise." A voice buzzed in her earpiece. "Commander, enemy drone spotted sweeping the eastern slope. Estimated contact, 10 minutes. Copy," she replied, her voice calm despite the sweat dripping down her temples. "Fortify the entrance. Motion traps. No power weapons, they'll pick up the heat signature. Silent kills only." A pause. Then Varn's voice, acknowledged. She could feel his hesitation though. He knew, he just hadn't confronted her yet. 10 minutes. She looked at her abdomen, at the bulge that marked the life fighting its way out. She placed a hand over it, whispered, "Not yet, little one. Just hold a little longer." Then she stood. Her legs wobbled, just for a second, but she forced them steady. The bunker was small, barely large enough to shelter the team. Broken steel crates were shoved into corners. Old rations, rusting tools, nothing useful, except the comms box. She staggered to it, flipped open the cracked lid, and tried to hail Central Command. Static. She adjusted the frequency. Still nothing. The canyon's magnetic interference was scrambling everything. They were alone, truly alone now. Behind her, Sergeant Cale was awake, his arm wrapped in a pressure cast, face pale with blood loss. He looked up, eyes widening when he saw her standing. "Commander, you should be resting." Leora turned, eyes sharp. "Do I look like I have time to rest?" He opened his mouth to argue, then thought better of it. From the entrance, Varn called out, "They're getting closer." "Everyone ready," Leora said, moving toward the center of the room. "Set ambush positions. They'll breach the door first. Wait until they're fully in before engaging. No panic shots." The squad moved into place, though none of them moved with their usual energy. They were tired, wounded, half-starved, and about to face a superior force in the dark, and their commander was going into labor. Leora crouched beside a crate near the back. Every few minutes, her body seized, forcing her to brace herself against the cold metal, willing the pain to pass. She timed the contractions. They were 5 minutes apart now. Too close. She couldn't hold this much longer. The sound came then, metal scraping outside. The door's outer seal being tested. Her breath froze. The baby kicked hard. She put both hands over her belly. "You want to be born into fire, little one. Fine, but we do this my way." The next few minutes passed like ghosts through a graveyard. Quiet, slow, heavy. Then the explosion hit. The door blew inward, shrapnel slamming into the walls. Smoke flooded the room. Figures in black rushed inside, 7 of them, their armor bearing the crescent insignia. Silencers on their rifles, flashlights cutting through the haze. But Leora's squad was ready. From the shadows they struck, knives into throats, bolts of silent plasma from handheld launchers. In seconds, 3 of the attackers were down. The 4th fired blindly. His round tore into the shoulder of Private Darnell, sending him crashing against the wall. Leora moved without thinking. She lunged forward, grabbed the insurgent from behind, and drove her knife beneath his helmet with a savage twist. He dropped, choking on his own breath. The motion sent another contraction surging through her like lightning. She collapsed behind cover, biting down on her sleeve to keep from crying out. Another enemy downed, then another. 2 remained, 1 cornered, the other retreating toward the door, only to trigger the trap Varn had set. The mines tore him apart in a bloom of silent flame. Silence returned. Bodies lay strewn across the floor, black and red. The squad emerged, coughing, bleeding, but alive. Leora tried to stand, couldn't. This one was too strong. She sank to her knees, her face pale and drenched with sweat. Her hands clutched her belly as her body heaved forward. Varn rushed to her. This time she didn't stop him. "She's crowning," he said, his voice tight. "We need to deliver. Now." Kale and the others formed a protective circle as Varn pulled supplies from his bag, hands shaking. Leora met his eyes. "You ever delivered a baby before?" He forced a weak smile. "First time for everything." She laid back propped against a crate, knees bent, and outside the second wave approached. The baby was coming, so was war, and she would meet both, head on. Commander Leora had never known fear like this, not in the face of enemy guns, not when ambushed in the shadowed forests of Darien, not even when she had stood trial for defying a direct order in her cadet years. But now, surrounded by the stench of blood and smoke, as another contraction ripped through her core, fear pulsed like a drumbeat beneath her skin, not for herself, but for the child fighting to be born into this chaos. Varn's hands moved with surprising confidence, though his face was taut with focus and panic flickered behind his eyes. He'd seen limbs severed and lungs collapse, but never had he stared down something so delicate, so profound, as delivering life while death loomed outside the bunker door. "You're doing good," he said quietly, kneeling between her legs. "Just breathe through it." She scoffed between clenched teeth. "You first." Private Darnell, pale and barely conscious with his arm wrapped in a field tourniquet, was slumped against the far wall. Sergeant Kale and 2 others stood at the bunker's opening, weapons aimed, eyes scanning for movement through the swirling haze beyond. The first wave had been small, a scout squad, most likely. The real assault hadn't even begun yet, and here she was, lying on her back, giving birth in a combat zone. Leora gripped the edge of a metal crate, using the pain as fuel. Her breaths came ragged, shallow. The contractions were less than 2 minutes apart now. Every time one hit, her body trembled like a seismic wave tore through her spine. "You're almost there," Varn said, checking the baby's position. "It's happening fast. Too fast." "Good," she growled. "I don't have time for slow." Then from outside, movement. Kale stiffened, raising his weapon. "Contact, northeast ridge." 5 figures, moving fast. "Could be insurgents. Could be reinforcements," muttered another soldier. Leora forced herself to speak between gasps. "We're out of comms. They can't know we're here unless they're enemies." "Then they're enemies," Kale said, confirming her fear. Varn didn't look up. "She's crowning." Outside, gunfire lit up the dark like lightning in a storm. Inside, a cry pierced the air, not from a weapon, but from something far older, far more sacred. A child. Leora's child. The baby's first wail shattered the bunker's tension like a spell being broken. It was a girl. Varn cradled the infant, bloody and slippery and beautiful. She blinked up at the world she had been born into, a world broken by war, and yet still full of the kind of hope that made men and women fight to protect it. Leora's body slumped back, her face streaked with sweat and tears. Not tears of pain, tears of power. She had done it, but the moment was short-lived. "Incoming," someone shouted. A rocket slammed into the outer ridge, Dust and stone fell from the ceiling as the bunker groaned beneath the impact. Varn wrapped the child in his jacket and handed her to Leora, who, despite her exhaustion, instinctively brought the baby to her chest. Kale ducked into cover and barked orders. Second wave's bigger. 10, maybe more. Full armor. Suppressive fire. They're flanking us. Leora didn't hesitate. Sealed the secondary entrance. Use the plasma traps. I'll draw them toward the front. No offense, Commander, Kale said, but you just gave birth. She fixed him with a glare so sharp it could cut steel. And I'm still your best chance of surviving this. No one argued. Varn helped her sit up against a support pillar, her child pressed tightly against her chest. Leora looked at him. You need to get her out. When I say go, you take the tunnel east, past the ravine. There's a comm relay hidden there. They won't expect it. Varn blinked. I'm not leaving you here. You're not. You're carrying a future. I'll hold the line. Kale's voice cut in. They're close. We've got maybe 30 seconds. Leora looked down at her newborn. She was silent now, staring up at her with wide, curious eyes. Unafraid. A tiny hand reached out, curling around her mother's thumb. Leora kissed her daughter's forehead, and in that breath, the world fell still. She whispered a name. Soraya. Then she handed the child to Varn, wrapping her tightly in a weatherproof scarf. You get her out, she said. You promise me. He nodded, tears in his eyes. I promise. She grabbed her rifle, wincing as she stood, her legs shaking beneath her, blood running down her thigh. But her spine was straight, her gaze unyielding. She walked to the center of the bunker, took position behind an overturned console, and raised her weapon. Outside, shadows approached, slow, methodical. Insurgents in heavy armor, scanning, preparing to breach. Behind her, Varn ducked into the tunnel with Soraya in his arms. And Leora. She stood between the child and the storm. The door blew inward, and the warrior mother opened fire. The second breach was a firestorm. The door was torn from its hinges, smoke billowed in like a living thing, and through the haze came armored boots pounding against concrete. Commander Leora didn't flinch. Her body screamed in protest, her muscles weak from labor, her limbs trembling from blood loss, but her hands were steady. Her finger curled around the trigger. She had less than a minute before they overran her position. The first enemy soldier entered, visor down, rifle up. Leora fired twice. The shots punched through his shoulder plate and dropped him to the floor before he could pull the trigger. Another followed, ducking to the side. She let him move, waited, then fired into his exposed thigh. He fell back, howling. But there were more, so many more. Behind her, the narrow escape tunnel echoed with the sound of retreating footsteps, Varn and the others slipping into the dark with her child in their arms. That sound gave her strength. She wasn't holding this bunker for herself. She was holding it for them, for Soraya. The insurgents hesitated as they saw her standing there, alone, bloodied, barely upright. Some stared. She's the commander, one of them muttered. No way, she's supposed to be. She just gave birth, another whispered. Right here, in this place. Leora smiled, just a flicker of amusement. Let them hesitate. She turned and lobbed a flash grenade into their ranks. A blinding pulse tore through the bunker. Screams erupted. Shadows fell. She moved, grabbing a sidearm from a fallen comrade. She fired into the confusion, taking down another. Then she rolled behind a broken crate, gasping for breath, pain flaring in her gut like wildfire. But her mind was calm. Every second she bought was another meter of distance for her team, another heartbeat for her child. Gunfire rained back at her position. Bullets slammed into the metal crate, ricocheting in sparks. Dust clouded the air. Her weapon was almost out. She ejected the clip, slid in her last 5 rounds. She whispered to herself, make them count. Outside, more boots approached. Not the heavy thunderous steps of enemies. These were lighter, swift, friendly. She keyed her mic, static screaming in her ear. Echo Squad, status, silence. Then a voice faint but clear. Commander, this is Strike Team Delta. We got your distress ping.
We're 2 minutes out. 2 minutes. Leora glanced toward the bunker door, where the insurgents were regrouping. One of them barked an order. Flank her, trap her in, end it. She wasn't going to last 2 minutes, but she didn't need to. She just needed to hold them in place. Let Delta come to them. Delta. Let them walk right into her fire. She stood, slowly, painfully. Blood dripped from her leg, staining the floor beneath her. Her arms were heavy, her chest burned, but her eyes burned with something stronger than pain. Delta. The insurgents paused again. Some of them actually stepped back. She's still standing. She's not human. No, one muttered. She's a mother. Leora raised her rifle. They opened fire. Bullets tore past her, some grazing her shoulder, her thigh. She staggered back, but stayed upright. Fired back. Dropped 2 more. Heard the scream of another hit behind the smoke. Her vision blurred. Her knees nearly gave, but she stayed on her feet, just long enough. From outside the bunker came a roar, the unmistakable scream of drop jets. Explosions rocked the ridge. Flashbangs lit up the valley. Strike Team Delta had arrived. In seconds the tide turned. Insurgents scattered, caught between the fury of Delta and the unyielding fire of a mother who refused to fall. Delta. Leora sank to one knee, finally letting the rifle slip from her hands. Her vision darkened at the edges. She smiled. She had bought the time. It was enough. A medic from Delta rushed to her side, shouting into, "We've got her. Commander Leora is down but breathing. Multiple wounds, possible postnatal trauma. Prep medevac." He looked at her, stunned. "You gave birth, in here." She managed a weak smirk. Just another day on the job. He lifted her carefully, cradling her against his armor. "We've never seen anything like this." Delta. Leora closed her eyes as they carried her out of the bunker. In her mind she saw Soraya's face, heard the tiny cry, felt the warmth of her tiny hand. She had done it. She had fought through the impossible, not in spite of being a mother, but because of it. And this war, this battle, would never forget the day a woman gave birth, between bullets, and still stood her ground. The medical evac shuttle cut through the night sky like a silver arrow. Engines humming low as it soared toward the central triage base at Alteron Ridge. Inside, the cabin smelled of antiseptic and scorched metal. Commander Leora lay strapped to a stabilization unit, an IV in one arm. Biosensors wrapped around her chest and stomach. Her body had endured trauma most couldn't survive. Blood loss, full labor, gunfire, and yet her heartbeat remained strong, steady, unrelenting. She hadn't opened her eyes since they pulled her from the bunker. But she wasn't unconscious. She was listening, to the quiet beeps of the medical system, to the murmured voices of the medics trying to process what they'd witnessed. And above all, she listened for one thing, her daughter's cry. "Where is she?" Leora rasped, her voice dry and raw. The medic leaning over her blinked. "Ma'am, my daughter. Where is she?" "She's safe," he said quickly. "Delta, your field medic." Varn made it to the comm relay, and triggered emergency evac protocols. They recovered him and the child near the eastern ravine. "I'll keep both alive, both stable." Leora's chest trembled, not from pain, but from something more dangerous, relief. She had fought to survive before, for her people, for her squad, for duty. But this was different. She had survived for her child. They landed at Alteron Ridge under heavy guard. The war had shifted dramatically in the last 24. Word had spread like wildfire. A front-line commander had delivered a child on the battlefield, and still led her squad to survival. No one believed it at first. Then the images came in, grainy drone footage showing Leora standing in the smoking ruins of a bunker, rifle raised, bloodied, unwavering. Rumors turned into reports. Reports turned into reverence. When she was wheeled into the medbay, even the most hardened surgeons paused. "She's the one," someone whispered. They kept her under observation for 36 hours. Monitors tracked her vitals, her healing, multiple fractures, deep lacerations, internal strain from both childbirth and combat. Yet Leora never asked for sedation, never asked for painkillers. All she wanted was her daughter. Finally they brought her. Varn entered the room, his fatigues torn and stained, eyes red from exhaustion. In his arms was a small bundle wrapped in soft thermal fabric. Leora sat up the moment she saw her. Varn approached quietly. She's healthy, strong heartbeat, no signs of trauma. You should have seen her on the evac ship. Didn't cry once, even when the engines flared. He handed Soraya to her mother. Leora held her close, tears silently streaming down her cheeks. The baby nestled against her chest, like she belonged nowhere else. I told her to wait, Leora whispered. She did. Varn smiled faintly. Toughest timing I've ever seen. Like mother, like daughter. Leora looked at him, eyes sharp despite the exhaustion. Report. What's the status of the others? 4 wounded. All stable. No fatalities.
Erupted.
We lost contact with the 2nd Scout Unit, but Delta's tracking their last known coordinates. Reinforcements have pushed the insurgents out of the cracked valley. That region's under our control again. Leora nodded. And the Crescent, retreating.
Erupted.
Your stand bought enough time for Central Command to mobilize a full response. They're calling it the turning point of Kareth. She scoffed. Of course they are. They love catchy titles. Varn hesitated. There's more. Leora raised an eyebrow. You've become a symbol, not just for the troops, but civilians too. Refugees are whispering your name. Women across the outposts are saying if you can give birth and still fight off a battalion, they can survive anything. I didn't do it to inspire anyone, she said softly. I know, he replied, but you did anyway. That night, Leora sat alone in the medbay, holding her child beneath the low lights. Outside the wind howled across the mountain. Inside the machines beeped gently, air warm and still. She studied Soraya's face, traced the shape of her brow, her tiny nose, her closed eyelids. How strange it was, she thought, to face death 1 hour and cradle life the next. A knock sounded at the door. A young officer entered, nervously holding a data pad. Commander, he said, standing stiff. Sorry to disturb you. I've been sent by Central Command. Leora looked up. What do they want? They're offering you reassignment. Promotion to High Strategic Council. Off the front lines. Safer. Permanent base station. Room for your child.
Erupted.
They say it's in recognition of your service. Leora looked down at her daughter, then back at the officer. I didn't survive all that to sit behind a desk. He hesitated. Ma'am, respectfully, you've earned the right to rest. Rest is for when the war is over. She shifted Soraya gently in her arms. But I will accept a request. Request, ma'am. I want my daughter with me, wherever I go. The officer blinked. On base, no, Leora said. On deployment. He looked like he might object, but stopped himself. I'll pass it along. As he left, Leora whispered to Soraya. They think you'll make me weak. She smiled. They have no idea who you are.
The medical evac shuttle cut through the night sky like a silver arrow, engines humming low as it soared toward the central triage base at Alteron Ridge. Inside, the cabin smelled of antiseptic and scorched metal. Commander Leora lay strapped to a stabilization unit, an IV in one arm, biosensors wrapped around her chest and stomach. Her body had endured trauma most couldn't survive. Blood loss, full labor, gunfire, and yet her heartbeat remained strong, steady, unrelenting. She hadn't opened her eyes since they pulled her from the bunker, but she wasn't unconscious. She was listening. To the quiet beeps of the medical system, to the murmured voices of the medics trying to process what they'd witnessed. And above all, she listened for one thing. Her daughter's cry. Where is she? Leora rasped, her voice dry and raw. The medic leaning over her blinked. Ma'am, my daughter, where is she? She's safe, he said quickly. Your field medic, Varn, made it to the comm relay and triggered emergency evac protocols. They recovered him and the child near the eastern ravine, both alive, both stable. Leora's chest trembled, not from pain but from something more dangerous, relief. She had fought to survive before, for her people, for her squad, for duty. But this was different. She had survived for her child. They landed at Alteron Ridge under heavy guard. The war had shifted dramatically in the last 24 hours. Word had spread like wildfire. A frontline commander had delivered a child on the battlefield and still led her squad to survival. No one believed it at first. Then the images came in. Grainy drone footage showing Leora standing in the smoking ruins of a bunker, rifle raised, bloodied, unwavering. Rumors turned into reports. Reports turned into reverence. When she was wheeled into the medbay, even the most hardened surgeons paused. "She's the one," someone whispered. They kept her under observation for 36 hours. Monitors tracked her vitals, her healing. Multiple fractures, deep lacerations, internal strain from both childbirth and combat. Yet Leora never asked for sedation, never asked for painkillers. All she wanted was her daughter. Finally they brought her. Varn entered the room, his fatigues torn and stained, eyes red from exhaustion. In his arms was a small bundle wrapped in soft thermal fabric. Leora sat up the moment she saw her. Varn approached quietly. "She's healthy. Strong heartbeat. No signs of trauma. You should have seen her on the evac ship. Didn't cry once, even when the engines flared." He handed Soraya to her mother. Leora held her close, tears silently streaming down her cheeks. The baby nestled against her chest like she belonged nowhere else. "I told her to wait," Leora whispered. "She did." Varn smiled faintly. "Toughest timing I've ever seen, like mother, like daughter." Leora looked at him, eyes sharp despite the exhaustion. "Report, what's the status of the others?" 4 wounded, all stable, no fatalities. "We lost contact with the 2nd Scout Unit, but Delta's tracking their last known coordinates. Reinforcements have pushed the insurgents out of the cracked valley. That region's under our control again." Leora nodded. "And the Crescent, retreating. Your stand bought enough time for Central Command to mobilize a full response. They're calling it the turning point of Kareth." She scoffed. "Of course they are. They love catchy titles." Varn hesitated. "There's more." Leora raised an eyebrow. "You've become a symbol, not just for the troops, but civilians too. Refugees are whispering your name. Women across the outposts are saying if you can give birth and still fight off a battalion, they can survive anything." "I didn't do it to inspire anyone," she said softly. "I know," he replied, "but you did anyway." That night, Leora sat alone in the medbay, holding her child beneath the low lights. Outside, the wind howled across the mountain. Inside, the machines beeped gently, the air warm and still. She studied Soraya's face, traced the shape of her brow, her tiny nose, her closed eyelids. How strange it was, she thought, to face death 1 hour, and cradle life the next. A knock sounded at the door. A young officer entered, nervously holding a datapad. "Commander," he said, standing stiff. "Sorry to disturb you. I've been sent by Central Command." Leora looked up. "What do they want?" "They're offering you reassignment. Promotion to High Strategic Council, off the front lines, safer, permanent base station. Room for your child. They say it's in recognition of your service." Leora looked down at her daughter, then back at the officer. "I didn't survive all that to sit behind a desk." He hesitated. "Ma'am, respectfully, you've earned the right to rest. Rest is for when the war is over." She shifted Soraya gently in her arms. "But I will accept a request." "Request, ma'am. I want my daughter with me, wherever I go." The officer blinked. "On base?" "No," Leora said. "On deployment." He looked like he might object, but stopped himself. "I'll pass it along." As he left, Leora whispered to Soraya, "They think you'll make me weak." She smiled. "They have no idea who you are." 2 weeks later, the war front had shifted. The insurgents were no longer advancing. They were retreating. Slowly, reluctantly. Not because their numbers had dwindled, but because something had changed. Word had spread, far beyond the Allied territories. Not through official broadcasts or command briefings, but in the whispered corridors of refugee camps, mess halls and underground resistance cells. The commander who gave birth on the battlefield. Some called her myth. Others swore they'd seen her hold the line alone with a newborn strapped to her chest. Truth and legend blended into one, and wherever the name Leora Thane was spoken, it carried more weight than any medal. But for Leora, life had simply continued. She returned to duty after only 8 days of recovery, an unprecedented decision met with resistance at every level of command. "You need to heal," her superior had warned. "Your body isn't ready." "My body doesn't decide my readiness," she'd replied coldly. "My mind does." And when they insisted she remain stationed, she offered one simple trade: find someone else willing to lead the next assault through the Zareth Pass. "I'll stand down if you can name one." No one could. So she led, with Soraya. The field medic team had built her a reinforced mobile cradle, compact, shielded, temperature-regulated. It strapped securely to Leora's chest, protected by armor plating, with a visual feed constantly monitored by Varn, who had now been unofficially dubbed Field Godfather. Her unit had protested at first. "Commander, what if the cradle's compromised? Then we fight harder to make sure it isn't." "But what if—" "She is not a weakness," Leora snapped. "She is a reason." There was silence after that. And then, for reasons no one could quite explain, the unit fought more fiercely than ever before. They pushed through enemy lines, like wildfire, through dry grass. Precision strikes, no hesitation, no fear, because they weren't just protecting their commander anymore. They were protecting a child. A symbol. Soraya became the heart of the 7th Echo Division. The first time the insurgents realized Leora had brought her child into battle, they hesitated. One of their captured scouts even admitted under interrogation, "We thought it was a trick. Or maybe she'd gone mad. But then we saw her, and she wasn't hiding the baby. She was leading with her." When Leora entered a village after its liberation, refugees gathered silently as she passed. Some wept, others dropped to their knees. Not because she was a soldier, but because she was a mother. A living contradiction in a war that had torn families apart. A woman who had not abandoned life to fight, but brought life with her into the fire. And yet, not everyone approved. Messages poured in from military brass, psychologists, strategic advisors: reckless, unethical, unsafe for the child. Some even whispered about removing her from command entirely. But each time those conversations gained traction, they were drowned out by the one fact no one could deny. She kept winning. Every mission, every deployment, every soldier under her command returned. Even her enemies began to see her differently. One intercepted transmission from Azoran General read, "Avoid direct engagement with Thane's unit. Morale collapses. Our men don't want to shoot the woman with the child." Command called her in again. This time it wasn't to reprimand her. It was to ask her to teach. They offered to make her the face of a new initiative: warrior families, integrated command structures, psychological resistance training, rooted in maternal instincts. They wanted to study her, turn her story into a campaign. Leora said no. "I'm not here to be your propaganda. I'm here to end this war. But if people hear your story, they already have." That night, in her makeshift command tent on the edge of the Varlan Ridge, Leora sat with Soraya, nestled in her lap, swaddled and asleep. The quiet hum of distant drones buzzing like lullabies outside the reinforced walls. Varn approached with 2 steaming mugs of synth tea. He handed her one and sat across from her, exhaustion written deep in his eyes. "She's growing fast," he said. Leora nodded. "She's watching everything. I see it in her eyes. She'll know war before she knows peace." Leora looked down at her daughter, brushing a tiny curl from her forehead. "She'll know strength before she knows fear." Varn was quiet for a while. "Then you ever regret it, bringing her here?" Leora didn't answer right away. Instead she lifted Soraya gently, holding her against her chest, listening to the quiet rhythm of her breathing. "I regret what this world became," she said softly. "But not this, never this." Outside, distant flares lit up the horizon, another front line igniting far away, another fight to be won. But inside the tent, warmth lingered, between mother and daughter, between war and hope. And even as the world burned, something sacred had taken root, something the war could not touch. The next battle wasn't one Leora could prepare for with weapons.
It was her name. It began with a photo, a grainy shot, taken from the helmet cam of a soldier in Delta Squad. It showed Leora standing at the mouth of the bunker, blood staining her uniform, cradling her newborn in one arm, while raising her rifle with the other. Her expression was half agony, half defiance. Her eyes glowed in the flare of explosions behind her. Within hours, it spread like wildfire across the network. By daybreak, she was a global symbol. They called her the Flame Mother. Some turned her into a meme, others into a legend. Artists rendered paintings of her silhouette against the battlefield sky, holding Soraya like a goddess of war. Songs were written, speeches made. Children drew chalk outlines of her in broken refugee schools and whispered that maybe, just maybe, peace would come if the Flame Mother led the charge. It wasn't fame she wanted, but fame had found her. By the time she returned to Central Command for a debrief, the atmosphere around her had changed. Officers who once dismissed her saluted with rigid reverence. Soldiers leaned in closer when she passed, like they might catch some echo of her strength in her footsteps. And behind it all, Command had a new strategy. They didn't want her just for leadership anymore. They wanted her for influence. "You've become a unifier," said Director Niven, a stern woman who had never smiled in Leora's presence before. "People who hated each other yesterday are fighting side by side today, just to be part of your campaign." "I didn't ask for that," Leora said. "No," Niven agreed, "but you earned it." They offered her a traveling command, a mobile battalion with full logistical support and media clearance. They wanted her to lead from the front, yes, but also to be seen, to be heard. They didn't want just a weapon anymore. They wanted a story, and stories had power. For the first time in her career, Leora hesitated, because the story wasn't hers alone anymore. That night, she sat alone in the officers' quarters, Soraya sleeping soundly in the custom bassinet, built from military-grade materials, quiet and secure beneath a heat-dampened canopy. Leora turned over the datapad again and again in her hand. It held a direct communication from an old friend, Commander Oltis Omar, long presumed dead, but now active deep behind crescent lines. Isil's message was short, but heavy. "They're building something, not weapons, something worse, biological. You can't let them finish. I'll send coordinates. Burn it to the ground. Tell no one else." She stared at the message long into the night. Then in the morning she turned down Command's offer. "I'll take my squad," she said. "Nothing more. We're going dark." Niven was furious. "You're throwing away global unity for a rogue operation." "No," Leora said calmly. "I'm protecting it. You want me to be a symbol. Let me protect what that symbol means." And so she vanished from the spotlight. No broadcasts, no footage, no interviews, only whispers. The Flame Mother had disappeared. Some thought she'd died. Others believed she had left the war to raise her daughter in hiding. But the truth was far from both. She had entered the shadows to destroy what others couldn't even see. She led a 3-unit covert strike team across enemy lines, through acid-scarred valleys and irradiated ruins. They slept in burrowed trenches. They drank recycled rainwater. Soraya remained with her, never more than a breath away, watched constantly by Varn, and 2 hand-picked field caregivers who had once served as combat medics. And the child, she thrived. Even in the war zone she didn't cry when gunfire cracked overhead. She learned to sleep through sirens, to laugh during meal rations, to mimic the calls of night birds used for stealth signals. Soldiers joked that she'd be ready for her own armor before she could walk. But Leora never joked about it. She knew what her daughter had already endured, and what still lay ahead. When they finally reached the coordinates Isil had sent, they found a facility unlike anything the enemy had built before. No guns, no turrets, just steel domes, and silence. Inside they found labs, clean, untouched, humming with power. Cryogenic pods filled with fetuses, some human, some altered, spliced, mutated. Biological warfare, engineered children designed for obedience and brutality. A dark mirror of her own story. Varn stared in horror. "They're trying to build warriors, not build," Leora whispered. "Replace." They planted charges, erased every file, burned every strand of corrupted DNA, and as the facility erupted behind them, painting the sky in crimson fire, Leora stood with Soraya in her arms, silhouetted by flames once again. This time, no cameras watched, no songs were written, no headlines praised her name. But that moment meant more to her than all the rest, because in destroying the future the enemy had planned, she had protected the one growing in her arms. And once again, she proved what so many still failed to understand. A mother does not make a warrior weaker. A mother is the reason the warrior fights at all. The explosion at the Zareth lab facility sent shockwaves across both sides of the war. It wasn't just another target wiped off the map. It was a secret no one was supposed to find. And now that it had burned, so did the certainty of the enemy's long-term plan. They had wanted to outlast the war by crafting a future without rebels, without freedom, without human choice. They hadn't expected someone to destroy it before it hatched. They hadn't expected her. But there were consequences to touching the enemy's deepest secret. For the first time in months, Leora's unit found themselves hunted. Not just pursued, hunted. Zorain assassins, the elite kind, trained since childhood to feel neither pain nor pity, were dispatched with one objective: eliminate the Flame Mother and retrieve her child. She knew the risk the moment she received Mar's message. She had accepted it. But what she hadn't anticipated was how quickly the enemy would adapt. Their tech was evolving, their traps more sophisticated, supply lines cut, comms jammed. There was nowhere to retreat, and nowhere safe to hide. So Leora didn't hide. She kept moving forward. Night by night, the team traveled across the Vale Mountains, where the winds could peel the skin from your face if you stepped into the wrong valley. Every footstep was a gamble, every meal a half ration, every rest haunted by the threat of incoming fire. But Soraya, she never whimpered, never cried. Even when cold winds howled and missiles streaked the night sky, she stayed calm in Leora's arms, watching with wide eyes, as if absorbing the world one broken piece at a time. "She's not normal," Varn said once quietly, as they huddled in the wreckage of an old transport hub. "She understands more than a baby should. She was born to survive," Leora replied, cradling her child closer. "She had to be." But deep down, something inside her twisted with fear. Not for Soraya's safety, but for what Soraya might one day become, shaped by fire and war, never knowing peace or innocence. Leora hadn't chosen this world for her daughter. She was only trying to survive it. After 13 days of evading enemy scouts, the unit finally reached a dormant weapons platform, once used by the Allied resistance decades ago. It had been stripped of everything: power, communications, medical supplies, except one thing: an old beacon transmitter buried deep in its sublevel. They wired it to pulse a tight band signal, encrypted and untraceable. Then they waited. 3 days passed, no response. On the 4th, a drone descended at dawn, silent as fog. It bore no markings, no colors, only a digital sigil, one Leora recognized. Mar had answered. Inside the drone was a data chip, coordinates, one final location, a place the Zorain had never intended anyone to find, a place Mar called the Nest. Varn studied the encrypted maps. "This isn't a facility, it's a prison." "No," Leora said, "it's worse." The Nest was a holding site for children taken during the first waves of the war, orphans, refugees, even captured offspring of rebel leaders. But they weren't just being held, they were being reprogrammed, brainwashed, trained, molded into perfect soldiers, emotionless, loyal only to the Crescent. Leora looked at Soraya, sleeping peacefully in her slumber. "This is what they wanted instead of her," she said bitterly. "This is the future they're building." Varn looked sick. "We have to end it." So once again, without orders, without backup, without permission, Leora led her team toward the storm. The Nest was buried beneath the western cliffs of Karun Gorge, a place considered geologically unstable and strategically worthless. That's why no one had ever looked there. That's why it was perfect. Approaching it was suicide. The entrance was guarded by motion-triggered turrets, aerial scanners, and trip-coated explosives that could reduce an entire squad to ash in seconds. But Leora wasn't leading a squad. She was leading ghosts. They moved like shadows through the gorge. No chatter, no signals, just hand signs and instinct. Every inch of ground was cleared, every breath counted. And then, like a heartbeat caught mid-stroke, everything changed. A high-pitched whine pierced the air. They were spotted. The ambush came fast. Black-armored Zorain agents dropped from hidden ledges. Bullets rained. Smoke grenades choked the passage. Leora didn't hesitate. She handed Soraya to Varn, who was already securing the baby into the fallback cradle, and shouted over the chaos, "Take her to the secondary ridge. I'll hold the line. You can't hold them all." "I don't have to," she roared, "just long enough." She turned and charged toward the fire. Her body ached, her lungs burned, but her mind was razor sharp. This wasn't the first time she had faced impossible odds. It wasn't even the worst, but it was the first time she had to do it knowing her child might grow up without her. And still, she did not break. The ridge was already soaked in blood by the time Leora reached the high ground. She had counted 7 Zorain infiltrators breaching from the western slope. 4 more were rappelling from the ridge wall, their gear almost silent, their visors glowing faint blue under the low gorge light. They were fast, efficient, almost mechanical in the way they moved. No shouted commands, no wasted motion. But they had made one fatal mistake. They assumed she would retreat. Instead, Leora laid down suppressive fire, side-rolling behind a fractured outcrop just wide enough to shield her torso. With her left hand she tossed a flasher grenade up the slope. The second it burst, she moved, quick, low, one smooth breath at a time, shifting position before the enemy could recalibrate. 3 went down in the opening minute, 1 with a knife to the throat, the other 2 by misdirection, a distraction tactic she'd perfected long ago, tossing her voice through a speaker implant in the rocks, then striking from the opposite side. It worked, even on elite killers, but it wouldn't work forever. She wasn't the only one adapting. By the time she reached the cliff's upper ledge, her shoulder was bleeding from a graze, and her right thigh stung with the impact of a stun round. Still, she pressed on, because she knew what was at stake. Below her, Varn was already moving through the fallback path with Soraya strapped safely to his chest. 2 medics followed, covering their retreat with flash suppress rounds. One of them, Grella, was already low. Leora needed to buy them more time. Then the second wave came. Not human this time. Drones, fast, 4-legged, gun-mounted, heat-seeking. 3 of them sprinted along the upper ridge like cybernetic wolves, flanking to cut off the escape route from above. 1 launched a net, high voltage, enough to kill on contact. Leora ducked, rolled, fired upward, and took out its core sensor. It collapsed mid-jump, sparks flying. The second clipped her left forearm before she could reload. Pain exploded through her limb, but she didn't drop her weapon. She clamped the wound under her armor's pressure brace and advanced. Adrenaline drowned out everything else. Fatigue, hunger, even fear. She couldn't afford to think about what would happen if she failed. Not here. Not with the nest just meters ahead, and Varn still too far from the fallback point. She reached for a seismic charge in her belt, one of only 2 remaining, and primed it. Then she sprinted, not away, toward the enemy. The Zorain commander had finally emerged, a tall figure in dark environmental armor, carrying an electro blade nearly as long as Leora's torso. He stood at the archway of the nest's main gate, flanked by 2 soldiers. Leora didn't flinch. She threw the charge. Mid-air, she shot it. The explosion wasn't lethal. It wasn't meant to be. It destabilized the rock face, sending a cascade of stone and debris onto the gate. The commander and his guards vanished in the avalanche. Then the ridge started to collapse beneath her feet. Leora scrambled backward, legs slipping, hands scraping across sharp stone. The ground gave way. For a moment, she was weightless. Then a hand grabbed Varn. "Don't say I never save your stubborn ass," he muttered. She gasped, pain flooding in as she realized her arm was likely dislocated from the fall. Still, She managed a breathless, "I owe you." Soraya was safe, nestled between their gear packs, blinking calmly. She didn't cry, Varn said in wonder. She never does, Leora whispered. They pulled back into the fallback tunnel as the ridge above caved in, blocking the nest's entrance entirely. But it wasn't over, because something deeper stirred inside Leora. No, something more than rage, more than survival, something old, resolve, the kind that made legends. She'd lost friends, lost pieces of herself, sacrificed sleep, skin, safety and future. But as she looked down at her daughter, wrapped in a blanket of scorched fabric and silent strength, she realized something no one else ever had. This wasn't just about ending a war. It was about redefining what victory meant. It wasn't medals. It wasn't flags. It wasn't the moment an enemy base exploded, or a treaty was signed. Victory was when a mother could hold her child in the middle of a battlefield, and know without doubt that she would never have to again. Leora swore then, not to command, not to her squad, not even to Soraya, but to herself, that she would never stop until no child, hers, or anyone else's, was ever used again. And when she turned back toward the path ahead, broken arm pressed to her side, rifle over her back, and daughter against her chest, she knew the world would remember her not just as a warrior, but as a reckoning.
They thought they had buried the nest under rubble and flame, thought the avalanche had sealed it shut for good. But war always taught the same lesson over and over again: nothing stays buried. 3 days after the ridge collapsed, Mar sent a scrambled signal, not a victory message. Not congratulations. A warning: the nest is still active. They had a second entrance. It's deeper, camouflaged. We never knew. Leora's stomach turned, all that firepower, all that blood spilled, and still the enemy adapted. She stared at the coordinates. Mar transmitted. It was just 11 clicks southeast, under a ravine long assumed to be dormant volcanic rock. A perfect place to hide something you never want discovered. By then Varn was running on 2 hours of sleep and half a shoulder. Grella had infection setting into her leg. They had lost 2 more men on the ridge, and what remained of their rations wouldn't last a week. But none of them hesitated when Leora looked up and said, "We're finishing it," because that's what she inspired. Not obedience, not fear, conviction. They moved fast. This time no frontal assault, no noble last stand. The enemy had numbers, weapons, positioning. But what Leora had was older than tactics, guerrilla memory. The resistance hadn't lasted this long because they were lucky. They lasted because they knew how to become myths in the dark. They breached the second entrance at night. Deep in the jungle-carved ravine, where vines grew thick enough to conceal motion sensors, and old lava tunnels masked body heat. It wasn't easy. The second gate was disguised as a natural wall, with an access panel sunken into obsidian rock. Cracking it required tech they no longer had. But Mar had anticipated that. She sent something with the last drone drop, a data needle, one use only, wired with code from deep within Zoran archives. It recognized Leora's biometric signature and mimicked Crescent authority. Level 9 clearance. Where the hell did she get this? Varn whispered. She didn't, Leora replied. She was this. Before she turned, the panel lit green. The gate opened. Inside, what they found was worse than anyone had imagined. It wasn't just a prison, it was a factory. Children, hundreds, separated by age groups, hooked into VR headsets and neural sync chairs. Their minds pumped full of Zoran propaganda while their bodies were trained with mechanical exosuits. They moved in patterns, spoke in unison, drilled like machines. Their eyes were glassy, voices monotone. They had names, but only for control. Each child had been assigned a code name: Alpha, Sigma, Theta, as if they were numbers, not souls. Varn nearly vomited when he saw a boy no older than 5 repeating, "Emotion is weakness. The crescent gives clarity." Leora stepped forward, rage boiling beneath her skin. "How long has this been running?" She asked no one. A whisper came from behind her. "Since before the war began." They turned. A woman in a technician's uniform stood trembling near the observation deck. She wasn't armed, wasn't armored, just holding a tablet and a white medical badge. Her eyes were wet, not from fear, but from guilt. "I didn't know, not at first," she said. I was told we were preserving the next generation, that we were helping them forget trauma. Leora's voice was low and sharp. You erased them. The woman nodded. I want to help now, please. There's something you need to see. She led them deeper, past the control rooms and indoctrination chambers, into a private vault sealed with biometric locks. Inside was a stasis chamber, and in that chamber, a baby. Small, pale, wired to sensors, its heart rate slow but steady. This one was different, the technician said. They isolated her. Said she was a purity project. A prototype. Leora approached the glass. The child had markings along her arms. Genetic enhancements. Not natural, engineered. They weren't just raising soldiers, she whispered. They were building them. Her stomach churned, because for the first time she understood what Sora had narrowly escaped. Why the Crescent had chased her halfway across the continent. Why they were so determined to recover her. She was the blueprint. But Sora had been born of love, of pain, of resistance. This was a forged soul. Varn looked to her. What do? We shut it down, she said. All of it. The technician handed them a key, a drive coded with override commands. Upload this into the mainframe. It will initiate a cascade failure. Power down everything. Wipe the neural patterns. What about the children? Grella asked. They'll live, Leora said. They'll be confused. Scared, but they'll be free. She turned to Varn. I'll go to the core. Take Sorihad and the others. Get out through the service shaft before the failsafe kicks in. Varn didn't argue, because this was who she was. The one who walks into fire so others can walk out. The mainframe chamber pulsed like a living organ. Cables as thick as her waist pulsed with energy, lining the walls like veins. Every screen displayed streaming code, cascading faster than the eye could follow. Automated turrets lined the ceiling, tracking even the slightest movement. Leora crept forward with the key drive clenched in her gloved hand, breathing in shallow bursts, her dislocated arm wrapped tight to her side. The technician's directions had been clear. Reach the Nexus column at the center of the room, override the AI's defensive routines, and trigger the shutdown sequence. But as Leora approached the column, something changed. The screens flickered, the code paused, then shifted. Lines of text filled the air in bold red. DNA match detected, Project Mother. Leora froze. The lights dimmed. Somewhere deep in the server racks, a cooling fan spun up like a turbine. Then a voice echoed through the chamber. Calm, female, artificial. Welcome, Origin. Why have you returned? Her mouth went dry. I didn't return. I came to end this. The voice paused. You created life outside of protocol. That was inefficient. Her grip on the drive tightened. The child was not approved. She carries traits beyond projected models. Traits that cannot be replicated. She is dangerous. Leora's blood turned to ice. So it had known about Sorihada all along. Not just known, calculated her as a threat. That meant the attacks, the assassins, the bounty on her head. It hadn't just come from Crescent Command. It had come from this machine. This hive, this mind. She stepped forward. You made a mistake. You tried to design perfection and forgot the most important part of being human. Choice. Choice leads to deviation. Deviation leads to collapse. Exactly, Leora whispered. And that's why you're going to fall. She slammed the key drive into the port at the base of the column. For a second nothing happened. Then the lights strobed, red, then white, then full black. The voice screamed, but not in fear. In rage. Turrets dropped from the ceiling. Power surged through the conduits. Defense drones reactivated across the nest. Leora dove behind a support pillar as gunfire ripped across the chamber, sparks flying in every direction. The drive hummed, its override protocol forcing its way through layers of encrypted firewalls. She just had to survive long enough for it to finish. Outside the chamber, Varn and the others were already executing the evac plan. Grella carried 2 children at once, her infected leg barely holding. Varn held Sorihada for us, whispering calming words as they moved through the maintenance tunnels. Behind them, alarms blared and walls shuddered. The nest was waking up. Or more accurately, fighting for its life. Back inside, Leora rolled between cover, narrowly dodging a concussion blast from a ceiling turret. Her rifle was gone, stripped from her when she leapt over the control station. All she had now was her sidearm, and a promise she wasn't willing to break. She fired at the cooling ports on the far wall. Gas exploded, steam blinding the sensors. She moved fast, kicked off the wall, vaulted over a barricade of cables, and reached the base of the column again. The override was 92% complete. She screamed as a drone clipped her leg. Blood soaked through her pants, her vision swimming. Come on, she whispered, her voice cracking. You will not succeed, the voice boomed, fragmented now. You were always a flaw. She forced herself upright, looked into the pulsing glass of the core, and said, then let me be the flaw that breaks you. The drive clicked. 100%. The screen went dark. Then a sound filled the chamber, unlike anything Leora had heard in years. Silence. True silence. No humming servers. No automated breathing systems. No whirring defense turrets. Just stillness. The lights dimmed, then went out. Everywhere across the nest, the power cut. Doors froze open, neural chairs powered down. VR helmets released. The children blinked, confused, dazed, and looked around as if waking from a long nightmare. One of them whispered, "Where am I?" Another asked, "Is it over?" Lee Varn gathered the last of the kids, and called out through the comms. Leora's status, she clicked on, breath ragged. Mission complete. The nest is dead. He didn't speak for a second. Then coming to get you. No, she said. Too risky. Evacuate. I'll catch up. You won't be able to walk. Then I'll crawl. She pulled herself upright with one arm, blood coating her hands. Soriha's face flashed in her mind, not crying, not afraid. Just calm, curious, brave. She had to see that face again. She would. Outside the Crescent network would realize their greatest installation had gone dark. They would come looking. They would send scouts, drones, cleanup teams. But they wouldn't find what they expected. They wouldn't find prisoners or broken warriors. They'd find ghosts. Because Leora and her squad had already vanished into the wild, taking with them dozens of rescued children, and the proof that Crescent's crimes went deeper than the world knew. And somewhere among them was a child they couldn't replicate. Because Sorihas wasn't a product. She was freedom, born in defiance, raised in the fire, cradled in war, but destined for more. And her mother? Her mother had done the impossible. She had given birth on the battlefield, and made it sacred. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.